A crow stares into a tube of water. Floating at the top, just out of reach, is a piece of food it desperately wants. Scattered nearby are a handful of small stones. The crow picks one up, drops it into the tube. The water rises, just slightly. It picks up another stone, drops it in. The water rises again. This isn't luck. This isn't trial and error. The crow keeps going, stone after stone, watching the water climb closer and closer to the top until finally it can reach the food. Researchers had seen birds solve puzzles before, but this specific test wasn't designed for birds at all. It was borrowed directly from developmental psychology, the exact same task scientists use to measure how children's brains develop an understanding of cause and effect. And when they ran the numbers, comparing the crows against real children who'd taken the identical test, the results were almost hard to believe. Children under 6 couldn't reliably solve the hardest version of this puzzle. The crows could. Today, we're going inside the study that forced scientists to ask an uncomfortable question. What does it actually mean when a bird with a brain the size of a walnut can outthink a human child? This entire line of research traces back to a story most people learn as children. Aesop's fable of the crow and the pitcher. A thirsty crow finds a pitcher with water too low to reach. Rather than giving up, the crow drops stones into the pitcher, one by one, until the water rises high enough to drink. For centuries, this was treated as exactly what it appeared to be, a fable, a moral lesson about persistence and cleverness. Nobody seriously asked whether a real crow could actually do this. Then, in 2014, a researcher named Dr. Corina Logan, working at UC Santa Barbara, alongside collaborators at the University of Auckland, decided to test it directly, not as folklore, as a genuine scientific hypothesis about crow cognition. The species chosen for the study was the new Caledonian crow, a bird already famous among scientists for something almost unheard of in the animal kingdom outside of primates. These crows don't just use tools, they manufacture them, bending and shaping twigs and leaves into hooks, specifically designed for extracting food from tight spaces. If any bird was going to solve a physics puzzle from an ancient fable, this was the species most likely to do it. But Logan's team didn't just want to know if crows could solve the puzzle. They wanted to know something far more specific. How did crow cognition actually compare to human cognition, tested using the exact same benchmark? To make a fair comparison, researchers didn't invent a new test for the crows. They used one already established in child psychology, a water displacement task specifically designed by researchers studying how children's understanding of cause and effect develops with age. The basic setup was simple: a tube, partially filled with water, with a desirable object floating just out of reach at the surface. Solid objects nearby that could be dropped in to raise the water level. But the real test wasn't just whether the crow could drop stones into water. Researchers built multiple versions of increasing difficulty, specifically designed to reveal deeper levels of causal understanding. Could the subject tell the difference between solid objects, which would raise the water, and hollow objects, which wouldn't? Could they understand that dropping stones into a narrow tube would raise the water level faster than dropping the same stones into a wide tube? And in the hardest version of all, could they understand something even more abstract? 2 tubes, connected by a hidden tube underneath, invisible to the eye. Stones dropped into one tube would somehow raise the water level in the completely separate tube next to it. This final test wasn't really measuring whether an animal could solve a puzzle. It was measuring whether that animal could reason about a hidden, invisible cause it had never directly observed. An extraordinarily abstract cognitive leap. The results, published in the scientific journal PLOS ONE, surprised even the researchers running the study. The crows consistently chose solid, sinkable objects over hollow ones, understanding almost immediately which materials would actually raise the water level and which wouldn't. They preferentially dropped stones into the narrower of 2 available tubes, correctly identifying which container would let them reach their reward with less effort. But it was the final, hardest test, the hidden connected tube, where the results became genuinely remarkable. The new Caledonian crows successfully solved it, understanding, apparently through some form of reasoning rather than simple trial and error, that dropping a stone into one tube would raise water in a completely separate, connected container they couldn't directly see linked together. Dr. Logan later described the significance plainly. The crows discriminated between different volumes of water and passed a modified version of the test that, up to that point, only 7 to 10-year-old children had been able to complete successfully. Not 4-year-olds, not 5 or 6-year-olds. The specific age range where a child's brain typically becomes developed enough to reason through that level of hidden causal complexity, the crows matched it. Here's where this story becomes more nuanced and more interesting than a simple headline suggests. This wasn't the only direct comparison researchers ran between crows and children. In a separate but related line of research comparing corvid and child cognition, scientists tested both species using tasks involving delayed gratification, the ability to wait for a better reward, instead of grabbing an immediately available one. When both the reward and its replacement stayed visible the entire time, crows and children performed similarly, both capable of waiting patiently for the better prize. But when researchers made the task trickier, hiding the better reward briefly from view, requiring memory alongside self-control, the children pulled ahead. The crows struggled specifically when they could no longer see the reward they were supposed to be waiting for. This distinction matters enormously. It means crows aren't simply universally smarter than children in every possible way. Their cognitive strengths and weaknesses are shaped differently, sharper in some specific domains, like understanding physical cause and effect, and comparatively weaker in others, like tracking something no longer visible. Researchers studying this describe it as a fundamentally different cognitive architecture, rather than a simple hierarchy of smarter versus less smart. Crows and humans evolved intelligence along completely separate evolutionary paths, arriving at strikingly different solutions to similar problems. If this nuance is making the story even more interesting to you, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this kind of research reach more people. Here's what makes this discovery even more remarkable once you consider the biology involved. A crow's brain weighs a tiny fraction of a human brain, roughly the size and weight of a walnut. For decades, brain size was treated as one of the primary predictors of intelligence across species. By that measure, a crow solving abstract causal reasoning problems on par with a 7-year-old child should have been essentially impossible. Researchers studying corvid neurology found part of the answer in how that small brain is actually structured. While mammalian brains, including our own, rely heavily on a layered structure called the neocortex for complex reasoning, bird brains evolved an entirely different architecture, using a densely packed region called the pallium. Recent neurological research has found that despite the dramatic size difference, the neuron density inside a crow's brain can rival, and in some regions even exceed, the neuron density found in primates. More thinking power packed into a dramatically smaller physical space. Scientists now increasingly describe this as a case of convergent evolution. Two entirely separate evolutionary lineages, birds and primates, arriving independently at sophisticated cognitive abilities using completely different biological blueprints to get there. Not the same brain, shrunk down, an entirely different kind of brain, arriving at remarkably similar results. So what does it actually mean when a bird can match a 7-year-old child on a test of abstract reasoning? For a long time, human intelligence was treated as the standard against which every other species was measured, a single scale with humans at the top and every other animal ranked somewhere beneath us. Studies like this one complicate that picture significantly. Crows aren't simply a slightly dumber version of a human. In certain specific, measurable domains, tested directly against human children using identical scientific methods, they perform at a level that genuinely rivals, and in this specific causal reasoning test, actually matched a child years into their cognitive development. At the same time, researchers are careful to note the limits of that comparison. Children possess enormous cognitive advantages crows simply don't have. Complex language, the ability to learn from cultural knowledge accumulated across countless generations. Reasoning abilities that continue developing for years beyond where this specific test measured. But the comparison itself reveals something important. Intelligence, it turns out, isn't one single thing that different species simply have more or less of. It's a collection of specific, separately evolved abilities, and in at least one measurable, scientifically tested domain, a bird with a brain the size of a walnut can genuinely stand shoulder to shoulder with a human child. So the next time you see a crow standing on a sidewalk, tilting its head, studying something with what looks almost like calculation, remember what that brain is actually capable of. Somewhere in a research lab, a crow solved a puzzle involving hidden, invisible causes. The exact same puzzle that stumps most children until they're 7 years old, not through instinct alone. Through genuine reasoning, built inside a brain a fraction the size of yours, using an entirely different biological blueprint than the one evolution gave us. If this changed the way you'll look at the next crow you see, subscribe to Birdhearts so you never miss the next hidden superpower in the bird world. And tell me in the comments, did you know a crow could solve a puzzle that stumps most young children? I'll see you in the next one.